Well, that has to get you excited for Saturday. Hopefully you guys can stay and go out and watch cross country. So we're going to head into our first panel now, and it's a little bit more of a discussion than a traditional panel, and it's focused on business practices and aftercare. And we all know that any business, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever, that can measure its tenure in decades instead of years has learned to be dynamic and adaptable, weathering change in various ways, and a huge part of that is being proactive. To start off today's lineup of sessions, we have two people well-versed in running sustainable and effective nonprofits, Erin Halliwell and John Nicholson. Erin is the head of TCA and has been there, again, can measure her tenure in decades, and John has been at Old Friends, taking the helm of that organization that has been a beacon in the thoroughbred industry from its founder after he had run the Kentucky Horse Park, where we'll be going on Saturday, for years. With that, I'd like to introduce Erin, who's going to lead our conversation. TCA, before Erin, was established in the 1990s to provide grants and assistance to nonprofits serving ex-racehorses and the people who care for them. And in the decades since, they have distributed more than $20 million to more than 200 organizations. John, like I said, is taking over Old Friends. Michael Blowen was the founder of Old Friends, who I'm sure many of you have met. And he is helping Old Friends to just continue to expand its reach in different states and even different countries. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Erin so she and John can have a conversation about succession planning and, in general, just planning for the future.
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everyone. Today, we will talk about running sustainable and effective nonprofits. With a focus on succession planning, as Jen mentioned. I'll kind of talk about each topic generally, and then ask John to share his wealth of knowledge and experience at Old Friends. But firstly, before we jump into that topic, I would like to acknowledge that there are many of our TCA grant recipients in the room today. And I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for all you do. You all really do the hard work with often very little recognition. So we see you, we appreciate you, so thank you for all you do. Yeah. So we'll jump into this topic. What is nonprofit sustainability? More or less, right, it's the ability of a nonprofit to maintain financial health and mission-driven impact over time. And I've identified 4 key areas that we at TCA kind of use as the barometer to assess the overall health of an organization. And these areas are financial, programmatic, operational, and leadership. And so the first topic that John and I will tackle today is considered programmatic. And I think when you talk about programmatic sustainability, it's really the ability to deliver your high-quality programs that work to fulfill your missions while creating valuable impact to those audiences that we serve, right? So there's multiple ways to do that. And the first is to have a really laser-focused and clear mission statement. And as nonprofits, of course, mission is everything we do. That's like our guidepost and our beacon. The missions, most of the missions in this room today involve rehab, retraining, rehoming, sanctuary, public education, or incentive programs for thoroughbreds. So everything we do is in relation to our mission. But another way that we create programmatic sustainability is by creating that valuable impact through that programming. And at Old Friends, you all do a really great job of creating tremendous impact in the aftercare community by not only providing sanctuary for hundreds of horses, but you've also upped the ante quite a bit by bringing value to the local community here in Kentucky via a new partnership with a senior living facility. Very cool. So can you talk to us about how this partnership came to be and what this partnership, how it aligns in the community and with the mission of Old Friends?
Well, absolutely, Erin, and good morning to you. Good morning to everybody. And I'd love to talk about Ashton Grove and our partnership with them. But first, I'm overwhelmed with the sense of humility being here this morning. I'm only a year into this, and I'm looking at the universe's great experts on aftercare. So it's very, very humbling. And I was so moved by Dr. Forbes' remarks reminding us of the human-horse bond. And speaking of being humble every day, I not only am the first CEO of Old Friends not named Michael Blowen, but I'm seeing Michael Blowen every day. And it's like being the head of Disney with Walt Disney standing there with you at each and every turn. But it's wonderful. Michael and I are close friends, and I think we have something to offer in terms of succession and some of the lessons and mainly good things, but the lessons learned throughout that. But Michael, because of the power of his personality and the force of his character and his integrity, infused that into Old Friends, and everything that we did was, I think, very reflective of Dr. Forbes' remarks this morning and the whole spirit of aftercare and the spirit of IFAR. And part of that was what you're talking about, Erin, is partnerships and kind of unique strategic enterprises. So when I got back from Virginia, and my dear friend Michael and I would always get together 2 or 3 times a year, even if we were separated, for lunch or for dinner or something like that. And we began to talk about this possibility, which is another story maybe later, about how we wandered into the idea that he was ready to transition into another role and that perhaps I could come and be a help to him. But we went around this part of Kentucky, and I learned for the first time, really, the expansion of Old Friends, and that it is not a farm, it is a series of farms now, and that is actually a strategy for our growth. But he took me to Ashton Grove Senior Living, and Ashton Grove Senior Living is a very uplifting and human-enhancing, happy place for senior living. And it is surrounded almost like a horseshoe, about 60 acres, with our retired thoroughbreds. And you could just feel the level of happiness being there. And what we discovered, and what I discovered, was that this is not only very uplifting for the residents, but the residents interacting with these horses are very uplifting for the horses as well, including programmatic studies that they were doing in areas such as memory care. And so once again, these horses are doing things for us more than we could ever do for them, even in retirement. It's always what Boyd said, semi-retired. His 28-year-old thoroughbred is semi-retired. I think we could say that about ours as well. But what we learned from this wonderful relationship with Ashton Grove and their happiness with us and our delight with them is that we believe at Old Friends that part of our future involves bringing people and horses together in land management and happy communities. And this not only is really, I think, a way for us to go forward and grow, because we have to. Growth for our kind of sanctuary aftercare equals land. It just does. And so we have to have an effective strategy to grow, and through that, financial sustainability requires these kind of partnerships.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah, what an incredible partnership. I mean, what a win-win for the residents, both residents, horse and human.
And I'll point out, Erin, that this was started and it was made possible by John and Bev Passarello, who came from California to live. Yes, Jane, you're exactly right. But they came from California. They had always loved horses. Came to California to live at Ashton Grove because it was recognized as kind of the state of the art for senior living, and they financially made it possible to build the barn and to provide this financial sustainability to at least get it started. And so, once again, we have to have these benefactors.
That's right. Very important. Well, now let's zoom out a little bit and talk a little bit further about programmatic sustainability. And it can be, of course, not only aided by your clear mission statement and your valuable impact to the community, but it can also be defined by the organizational procedures that work to support your mission. And what I'm talking about when I mention that is this could look like your stated protocols and procedures within your aftercare facility for intake of new horses, or rehoming policies, adoption contracts, adoption follow-up procedures, that sort of thing. Any of the elements that make your program strong, make it sustainable. So along these lines of creating a strong program in support of your mission, and this may be a discussion of some of the harder parts of aftercare, but it's very important to have a clear understanding of when and when not to accept horses into your program. Can you talk about how Old Friends approaches this and kind of the thought process that goes into accepting or not accepting horses?
Sure. You know, this is an area, and you touched on it, Erin, that is complicated.
Sure.
And it doesn't lend itself to a simple, straightforward answer. I think if you looked at our website and say, you know, what does it take to donate a horse to Old Friends, keeping in mind that we are a forever sanctuary. That's our role. That's our niche and our lane within aftercare. It is a little bit vague, and that I think is important because it gives us the latitude to evaluate horses and the situation surrounding them on a case-by-case basis. When Michael started 20 years ago, I think it was much more straightforward. One and all come, and we're happy to have you. And as the success of Old Friends continued and the attention nationally and internationally to Old Friends through those decades, through those last 2 decades, it became a bit more challenging. I'll be very candid. When I came last February, I went through that exercise of just talking to our staff and to volunteers and to key supporters. And there were a couple of them who said, you should declare a moratorium on any new horses for a period of time. Because our acreage, even having now 5, but then last year having four farms, there wasn't a crisis, but there was beginning to be what I called a blinking yellow light that was forcing us to ask questions about paddock rotation and issues like that. And Michael and I talked, and all of us talked within the staff, that our ability to give the most comfortable and safe retirement and sanctuary to horses revolve around very, very comfortable paddocks and having lots of space, and we weren't going to compromise that. So we have, I think, a very, very individualized, rigorous process for our horses. And one of the good things, and Barbara Fossum heads this up for us, but we make it a collective effort within our team. Board members and staff members, I'm obviously right at the key of it. One of the key things is that we have great relationships with many people in this room. That horses that people have contacted Old Friends, it might be a better fit for another aftercare institution regionally or geographically, or in terms of rehab and second careers. Each situation is different. Old Friends is a bit unique. It's not totally unique, but a bit unique in that we have homes we welcome stallions. But all of us know that stallions require extra stuff, more room. And when you take mares as well, that creates a whole another level of complication on where the horses are geographically, and it's just not simple. And another complication is when is the proper time and proper way, and is it advisable for gelding? And I'm here with Dr. Brian Waldridge, who is key to all of these. He's on our board. He's our resident veterinary advisor. And we're constantly in communication with him on these issues as well. So I'll end where I began. It's
Excellent.
complicated.
It's very complicated. We understand that for sure. And I appreciate your comments about perhaps partnering with other organizations. You know, we're not all operating as islands here. I think the idea of partnerships, especially amongst other nonprofit organizations, other aftercare organizations, is very important.
I agree.
We're not alone. We're in this together. So then one kind of pivoting a little bit here, another kind of important element of programmatic sustainability, it's important for nonprofits to tell people what we're doing, right? So communicate the outputs of our success. And aftercare, that could look like how many horses are at your facility, or the number of new arrivals, number of adoptions, that sort of thing. And then communicate that with our stakeholders, with our audiences. So at Old Friends, what are some of the metrics and markers that you use to define success in the organization, and how are those communicated?
Well, you're talking about, Erin, I think several different levels. Mm-hmm. And one of the unique things about Old Friends is that we're in daily communication with the public. And that communication effort is a broad and universal communicative story of aftercare, and what this industry, what we're doing here this morning, this conference, what this industry is doing, an honest and candid assessment of the problems that have existed, but all the great things that we're doing. So therefore, to the general public that we are communicating with, that's a different scoreboard. We have this many horses, and we include several of, many of you. Aftercare in general is now a pillar of the industry and changing assumptions within our industry. So that scoreboard is how many horses have we helped and how many horses are here. Our horses, because we do daily tours to the public and have 20 to 25,000 people a year, we're an advocate. And our horses, therefore, are ambassadors for that. So that's one scoreboard. Internally, this has been interesting for the last year, because I believe that we need to do a better job at Old Friends, and we will, and we have, I think, this past year, and we'll do more, to create bigger scoreboards that have more statistics on them. I think for the first few years, you could just proudly say, we have X amount of horses here that we're taking care of. That's our measure of success. But I think now we need to look at horses per acre. Mm-hmm. We have done exhaustive work, and I'm sure all of you have had to deal with this in some form or fashion, the cost per horse. And that's a brand new metric. I'm not sure that our board members and our volunteers and our extended family have ever really sat down and looked at those kind of challenges. And now that, whereas 15, 20 years ago, Old Friends was a farm with 40 horses or 30 horses or 50 horses, that we're now 5 farms with 300 horses and a long waiting list, that requires keeping score in a whole different way.
That's right. That's a very good point. And that really very well brings us into our next topic, so thank you for that.
Happy to do it. I don't know what the next topic
well done.
is.
That rolls us right into the next element of sustainability that we'll talk about today, and that's financial sustainability. And when you hear the word sustainability, I think most often people automatically think finances. And it's a very important part of it all, for sure. But essentially that's referring to the ability of a nonprofit organization to generate and manage resources effectively over the long term. So it's essentially staying solvent, right? But what contributes to the financial sustainability of aftercare organizations? I have a few thoughts on that. Certainly the first thing would be diversifying your revenue streams, grants and donations from various sources, TCA, TAA, family foundations. It could look like direct donations from various fundraising efforts. At TCA, we do a few targeted appeal letters every year, events, campaigns, auctions, that sort of thing. Diversifying your revenue is really key. You can also receive revenue from program services like adoption fees, farm tours, things like that, corporate sponsorships, event sponsorships. It's the idea that collectively you're not relying on one source of income for your organization, because if that were to disappear, then the organization could become unstable. But at Old Friends, you've been in operation now for 22 years, so I bet you have a great strategy when it comes to diversifying your revenue streams. So can you give us an example, or glimpse rather, into your fundraising strategy? How do you keep it diverse, and what's worked and hasn't worked over the years?
Well, very interesting subject, and I think the one that I probably spend the most time on, and probably occupies the wee hours of the morning when you wake up. And I suspect some of my colleagues feel the same way. It is a constant presence in our life, and it is at the heart of sustainability. The finances is just that realistic fact of life. And when Dr. Forbes reminded us we were in an era of uncertainty that perhaps is unlikely to change anytime in the near future, and uncertainty is not our friend when it comes to the charitable donations that many of us rely on. So Old Friends over the years started out, and I love, Michael is such a better storyteller than I am, so tomorrow I'll get with him and just let him roll. But when he started, he loved to give tours, and it never occurred to him that people would pay for them. And he thought, well, he thought, well, that's obscene to charge people to do what I love. But what we found out is that people are very willing to pay for them. They're willing to pay for them because it's quality, it's interesting, and it's fascinating, and it's a special experience in people's lives to meet greatness, to meet a Kentucky Derby winner and Hall of Famer and those kind of things. But we also found out that people, once you explain that this is a key part of us being able to take good care of these horses, they're willing to pay, and even pay more. Michael brazenly says, everything in our gift shop's overpriced, and you're paying way too much money for this tour, just don't get mad at us. But, well, it's not really overpriced, and the tours are very good. So that was the first exercise in diversity of our income stream, was that. But in my past, both at the Kentucky Horse Park and in Virginia, the one thing I have learned is that facilities need to have diverse forms of income. The Kentucky Horse Park cannot rely just upon people renting stalls for horse shows. It has to have a different revenue stream. In Virginia, we participated in the historic racing machines, which that became an alternative source of income, which allowed for capital projects and things like that. We're looking at several different ways to diversify our income stream at Old Friends. And I touched on one a minute ago, and that is these farms that we have now, all are surrounded by people. I talked about Ashton Grove. The main farm that you'll visit tomorrow, you will see houses around there. Originally, what that farm was a farm first, then a real estate development that kind of used Old Friends as its green space, make it nicer, to drive up the value of the land. And that's great, except Old Friends didn't benefit by a single penny for that. And I say that with not the hostility that it sounds like, but we can't do that again. And it works wonderfully to have people in pleasant living conditions and surroundings who care about these horses, who are happy to be there. It's good for the people and good for the horses. Now we've got to make it good financially. So last spring, I was there at Old Friends for less than 3 months and put us $3.5 million more in debt because we bought a farm. Michael, just turned pasty white when we did this, but he actually was for it too. But the idea behind what we're doing there, and we hope to have announcements about this in the weeks and months to come, is that kind of human-horse relationship. I hope in the spirit of that human-horse bond that Dr. Forbes was talking about, but that also is financially benefiting our ability to operate our new farm there. There is no such thing as a free farm. And we have learned that. The two other farms that we operate in central Kentucky were donated, essentially, or at a very low price. But you still have to operate them. And so that's the need for that diversified income. A couple others real quick. We have a distillery that you'll see constructed across the street from us. And they have already made bourbon. And they're making lots of it, and I'm told it's very good. But we have a partnership with them that they're going to have Silver Charm bourbon, Big Brown bourbon, and I'll have another bourbon, our Kentucky Derby winners that live with us, even in a decanter set. And the sale of those bourbons are going, 50% of those proceeds are going to go to old friends. And additionally, on their visitor center, because it's going to be a beautiful tourist attraction, there'll be 14 acres set aside for old friends' horses, so that people there testing bourbon and sipping will see our retired horses come across the street and visit us as well. So we're working on some other relationships with businesses within the thoroughbred racing breeding industry. We're talking to some people now about how we can be better connected with the beginning of the life cycle, that at the before, not after care, but before care, as breedings are arranged, that aftercare is a part of that, and that old friends in particular is being recognized by that. So we're talking to some people about that too. But it is vital, I think, for all of us to have a diverse income.
Absolutely. Wow, that was great. I didn't realize about the bourbon distillery. That's incredible. Very cool.
It's popular.
Yeah. Well done. Thank you. So just to kind of close the loop on the financial sustainability discussion here, I think something else probably worth stating is, when we're talking about financial sustainability, and we've touched on this a bit, but it's, continuing to operate within your means, saying no to horses if you need to, pausing your intakes, that sort of thing. It can be really hard. That's a tough thing to do. But when we're talking about financial sustainability, certainly a very important part of the conversation. Additionally, I think to close the loop on that financial discussion, financial controls are probably the last thing to mention here, necessary for success in nonprofit organizations. And those can look like having clear financial policies, conducting regular internal and external audits, all of those things that work to maintain financial transparency and accountability amongst nonprofit organizations. More practical examples, maybe on a day-to-day basis, or what's your check signing process? Are you posting your 990 on your website? All of those sort of admin things that really contribute to the overall sustainability. Everything from ensuring your GuideStar and Charity Navigator profiles are up to date on those listings. Again, working with transparency issues there. So at Old Friends, what would you say are some of those kind of financial controls, procedures that has really helped and aided Old Friends in the success?
Well, Erin, you framed the question very, very well.
Thank you.
I think first of all we look to good examples like you and Thoroughbred Charities and TAA, who is our guiding light in so many respects, because not only do they encourage but require us to do those proper financial practices. Mm-hmm. What I think has been a lesson that I am taking with me throughout the first year, and then we'll take into the future, is increasing the financial literacy of our entire team, which would include our board, but also our staff and also our volunteers. I think there's a tendency, it's just something about human nature that we want to, we kind of whisper about our finances. And it's like something, polite people don't talk about. But I think we should talk about it and be incredibly transparent and very candid, and I know it was unusual when I began to speak at functions like our volunteer parties and more at board meetings about our finances and candidly, and having discussions about them, because it wasn't customary. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's an important thing among within our organizations, is to be upfront, to talk about it, and to, I'd say keep the scoreboard for everybody to see, to see how you're doing with all that. So for us, I think that's going to be the priority. We did a board retreat, the first ever in the history of Old Friends. We went to the Keeneland Library. It's a wonderful place to have a getaway for a day in that atmosphere, which was just very, inspiring. But I think we did, for the first time ever, kind of a deep dive into really how Old Friends operates. That only 20% of our income come from our tours and come from our retail operations. We're still heavily dependent on charitable donations. And it was the first time I introduced what we just talked about a few minutes ago, that we've got to diversify our revenue stream to make us a bit more recession-proof,
right.
And to have that diversity.
Yep. I agree, and I think I appreciate what you said about maybe bringing financials more to the forefront of conversations, and to the point, you can almost even use them sometimes as fundraising tools. Yes. Like I mentioned at TCA, we send out a couple of appeals each year, and I think in the last one that we sent out, we actually used it as a talking point, some of the rising costs and how everything is getting more expensive for our grant recipients, hay, feed. That I'm reading these things in your grant applications about how costs are soaring. Well, we're passing that information on to our supporters. So I think it can only help in that sense to really inform people that, look, things are getting more expensive.
Absolutely, and I want to touch on something that I should have when we were talking about sustainability and the admission of horses. That's been a key. It's been a change for Old Friends, but it's a subtle change. As Michael so successfully developed Old Friends, and as I tell our especially our veterans, everything you did well, because look where we are. So anything I say that is a departure from where we've been is not a criticism of where we've been. It's just a recognition that circumstances are changing, times are changing. There was a policy, whether it was written or not, but Old Friends would never, ever ask for money to accompany a donated horse. That was almost a point of pride. Mm-hmm. And Michael told me that, my friend, and I said, Michael, I am not so encumbered by your policy. So, and being aware of how you communicate with the donors, and Old Friends has about 2,500 individuals who donate annually, and I didn't want to interrupt the wonderful covenant that we have and the communication, but I did want to send a subtle message to those who are going to consider donating horses to us in the future. And that is not a requirement to donate, but information that in round numbers, it costs about $10,000 a year on average. I know it depends on veterinary care and various things like that, but on average, about $10,000 per year to maintain properly and happily maintain a retired thoroughbred horse. That's 1 year. We would recommend a $10,000 donation when you donate. And if you can't, that's fine, but please tell us why. And that's an interesting, some of the folks in our industry really couldn't say that they couldn't afford $10,000. And it's a subtle reminder that we expect to provide a warm and loving special home for this horse for way more than 1 year. And so we have to sustain a horse for maybe 10 years, which is $100,000. We're only asking for 10. But that's been a subtle change. And it may have the effect of making people think twice and maybe not have the attitude, well, I have a financial problem, a four-legged financial problem that I'm going to give away. And instead remind them that they have a broader responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great addition to your policies there. Okay, so let's pivot now into talking about operational sustainability. And operations I'm referring to in this sense refers to the day-to-day functions of the organization to keep things running smoothly. And many times with operations, we don't think about them until something goes wrong.
Yeah.
But for aftercare organizations on the facility side, operations can look like things like your barns, your fencing, paddocks, hay and feed storage. The number, and are those things adequate for the horses in your care? Are your watering systems safe and sufficient? On the staffing side, operations concerns can be things like, do you have enough trained staff to essentially carry out what you need to do? Everything from feeding and turnout, vet and farrier coordination, all while avoiding burnout or compassion fatigue, which are very real issues in nonprofit work. So basically, we're talking about the daily things that keep horses and humans safe while allowing you to carry out your mission. It's a lot to think about daily, for sure. But again, being a well-oiled machine operationally, what are some of those factors that keeps Old Friends running smoothly?
Well, thank you for saying we're a well-oiled machine. I didn't know that.
You are.
I think that Old Friends is blessed. It was blessed to have a wonderful founder in Michael, but it's blessed to have an extended family. And Brian Waldridge is right here in the first row. You'll be hearing from him later. He's an example of the family that we've been able to build. We have a facilities committee that's becoming increasingly active that Brian's a part of, that Dr. Waldridge is a part of, and Ron Wallace, who is a farm management expert. It's been his business and his career, the efficiency of farm management. And we brought a couple of other people in on that. And we discovered several things that we needed to improve on in terms of efficiency. We found out that now we have 4 farms within one county, and those farms were having different practices, not extremely different, but had different procedures. And it wasn't that anyone was wrong or right, but they were different. And that we needed to increase our communication among ourselves about best practices, about more efficient practices, the economy of scale, that we financially that we were probably not being efficient in expenditures because we were doing 4 different things instead of one thing among four units. The other thing we started that hadn't occurred before is at least weekly staff meetings of just about everybody, and it's amazing what communication does. And I know I've said that word a lot. How you can help each other. And I was talking to a couple of staff people's colleagues, friends and colleagues. And they said that one of the things they're very happy about now is that we're breaking down that Berlin Wall between inside people and outside people. We have a tourism operation, a retail operation, and a special events operation. And then, we operate a farm, 4 farms. And so we don't have like a farm meeting and then then the inside meeting. We have a meeting where we all talk and everybody gets a chance to talk about what they're working on and what they're doing. And one of the side benefits is that it increases the respect that we have for each other and an understanding, but it has the wonderful consequence of people helping each other. And when we find out that when our farm crew finds out which they may not have known before, that we're having the owner of a multiple Grade 1 stakes winner coming, they'll make sure a little more effort is made to make sure that horse is ready to say hello, and things of that nature. The infrastructure issues that we all face when pipes break and all those kind of problems, that labor-wise we can all help,
Right.
and not just have it compartmentalized. Efficiency is still an ongoing way we hope to grow.
As it should be.
Yep.
I think that makes perfect sense. And what a small shift in kind of your strategy, bringing everyone together at the meeting, but look at the dividends it's paid off for you. Really.
It seems to be working.
Yeah, great there. Okay, so the final topic, kind of in overall sustainability that we'll talk about now, is leadership and governance. Two very important factors in overall nonprofit sustainability. And essentially what I'm referring to there is how the nonprofit is led and managed at the board and executive level to ensure the long-term stability, effectiveness, and mission impact. And as we all know, nonprofits are really only as strong as as the people that are involved with the nonprofits. Strong board of directors, effective leadership, most important factors there for sustainability. Boards are super important as their diverse skills and perspectives can assist in various roles such as fundraising, outreach, marketing, fiduciary oversight, governance issues. I know it can be tough, though, to find suitable board members, right? At TCA, we often source board members from our existing donor base because we know that these folks have literally bought into our mission and support us. We've found some of our greatest board members that way. But at All Friends, can you share a little bit about your strategy for finding new board members? And then I know you mentioned your retreat, which sounds like a great onboarding for new members or new board members, but talk to us a little bit about your board.
Well, I think that's interesting, and our strategy for that is evolving. Let's put it that way, as Old Friends has evolved. And, Old Friends has the unique, its history is unique in that it was wonderfully dominated by a really strong personality like Michael, who had, at the time, a new and revolutionary idea. It's not so new now, it's not so revolutionary, but it was at the time. And he met with somewhere between benign kind of acceptance, kind of, all the way to ridicule, So his process of selecting board members would in the early days have been different. First of all, just to find people that thought he wasn't crazy, and that was step one. And as the organization has evolved, and as, for example, when TAA came along and ratcheted up the sophistication for all of us, it definitely changed how we formatted a board of directors. Mm-hmm. And I think there's been a subtle change that has evolved and is evolving. And that is that there is increased responsibility for board membership. And that is communicated at the very beginning. And it's subtle, and it's not quite as stark as I'm making it sound, but what may have been an invitation of, would you please be on our board, has now been, if you're willing to accept the responsibility, we think you could be a member of our board. But it comes with responsibility. Certainly the time, talent, and treasure, an expectation that you're going to participate financially, just if nothing else, as symbolic that you are in support of us, so that when we go out and raise money, we could say 100% of our board members participate financially. But also bringing active engagement with the expertise or the unique talents that you have, that you bring to the board. In other words, we're demanding more of our board than ever before. And in the days that Michael was the strong voice of advocacy, it may not have been necessary, but we now have to be a choir,
Right.
and we have to have a lot of people to fill that kind of void. Michael is still there, so he's not a void at all. But as the organization evolves, we need more participation. The family is growing, and the engagement of the board has to increase. And there has to be a firm understanding that you have an oversight role, and as directors and as presidents and as executive directors, we have to embrace that and not resist that. And because if there may be brief times where it's not convenient to have an active board, but those times are small compared to the importance of having a robust board of directors.
Agree completely. Amen to that. As someone that has a board of 17, I hear that. Yeah.
I mean, there are days.
There are days.
but they're few.
Yeah.
They're few.
I know we're closing in on our time here, and I want to get to the very important part of this discussion, which is succession planning. So no discussion of leadership and governance would be complete without talking about succession planning. I know it's not the most exciting thing to talk about, but it's so important for nonprofits. And essentially what that refers to is the strategy that is prepared for either planned or unplanned changes in leadership roles by identifying and developing successors and outlining transition strategies for those roles. Now, Old Friends has just been through a massive transition. Michael, on over to you, John. Can you walk us through kind of what that transition looked like? How was it prepared? And how has your experience been with that?
Well, I hope Michael would say the same thing, but it's been wonderful as far as I'm concerned. Personally, it's been just really fulfilling. So just to give, and I know we're closing in, but to give just a quick narrative, and I mentioned that Michael and I got together a year ago last fall just for our semi-annual get-together and talk things over and handicap horses and do all that sort of thing. And he asked me how I was doing, and I said, I'm just not, the semi-retirement doesn't suit me, and I'm just working on a project here and there doesn't suit me. He mentioned that at his age, he was ready to lessen his role and back off of the day-to-day headaches of administration. And by the end of lunch, by the time we drove back to the farm, we had an idea of what we wanted to do. But that was not absent. That wasn't just that casual gathering. Michael had begun through the board and through the staff to begin the discussion of succession, and he had asked several people to commit to paper to memorialize what they envisioned how a succession would work. And there became a structure of a plan. Mm-hmm. I think a little bit we kind of leapfrog. We got over our skis a little bit on going through the process of the plan. The next time we'll probably be a bit more methodical. Yeah. But Old Friends did have a written plan and has a written plan that is, for example, what are the roles of individuals if there's a sudden vacuum of leadership? If the bus came into town and hit somebody, that sort of thing. And then it had a pretty good narrative description of what was expected of the chief executive of Old Friends. So that's committed to paper. Now, more anecdotally, more from a personal point of view, I think a key word to remember in leadership succession planning is mentoring. Mm-hmm. I am so eternally grateful to my friend Michael for a couple things. He really mentored me informally about those kind of difficulties that are better explained than put in writing.
Sure.
All those little subtleties. And additionally, I identified a staff member or two that I said, I want you have total freedom to tell me even what I don't want to hear, or, and they became informal mentors as well.
I see.
So I think that process really, really lessened the stress of our transition.
Excellent. Yeah, and I would say, from the outside looking in, you put on a master class in how to make that successful transition. And I think one final point here before we wrap up, I know we're just about over time. Yours was a planned succession and executed, like I said, seemingly flawlessly. But I think one important point for especially U.S. aftercare organizations, in my experience, many of them are smaller. Sometimes there's just one person kind of doing all of the things, right? Well, suddenly, what if that organizational leader is no longer there? Over my time at TCA, I've seen that happen maybe 2 or 3 times for various reasons. So it's not super common, but it does happen. But just I would challenge you to kind of think about, okay, if that one person at your organization had access to your Facebook logins and your Instagram logins, your bank account, your PayPal, your Venmo, suddenly that person's no longer there, you can see the problem that might be created. So again, creating that culture of knowledge sharing, I think, as you mentioned, in mentoring is really important. And in doing some, putting this presentation together, I came across a quote that was really probably great to kind of end on. And it's, "An hour of planning can save you 10 hours of doing. Thank you, Dale Carnegie." So, I thought that was a nice way to end the discussion on succession planning. But I think that brings us to time. Anything else you want to add about sustainability and some challenges that we face here?
Looking forward to having everybody at Old Friends tomorrow. And
Absolutely.
I hope the train doesn't.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys. That was a really important topic, and I'm sure everybody got good takeaways. I've been the head of a nonprofit, and I've dealt with the worries that come with planning for the unforeseen. So we're going to move right into our next panel, and then we're going to take a break after that. So we're going to take a minute or two to get everyone ready and get their mics, and then we will be back with our panel on engaging equestrian communities.